Welcome back. We are now on to episode 5. Episode 5 is all about risk and readiness for change. So grab a coffee, relax and enjoy. In your view, what should a strong change plan include?
You've really got to get to the nub of why you need to make this change. And I think that's a big part of it. Why are we doing this? And then obviously how we're going to get there. So you've got your project plan, you've got your stakeholder map, you've worked out your kind of engagement with those. You also, and critical to this, and this goes back to that point I made before about change leadership, is about communication and making sure you've got a very clear communication plan. And it's something I'm really passionate about, because I think you've got to have that communication planning from day one and start thinking about what those touch points are and how you're going to communicate that message and to whom.
Talking about risk management, what's a good approach to risk management on, in particular, these large ERP, complex, gritty programs?
Getting the right senior people at the start of a change initiative to really understand what risk means, workshopping it, whether you call it a pre-mortem, that kind of sense of positioning it so that, imagine we're further down the track and it's all gone wrong, what are the things we would have done to have stopped it happening? But it's often around some kind of brainstorm that gets post-it notes on the wall, facilitated groups kind of then theme those, look for the areas of commonality, look for the areas which are coming up the most. They're showing the things that are on people's mind the most, putting some emphasis around those, grouping those and using your kind of good old-fashioned 3x3 matrix of probability and impact, I think, that gives you that visual red, amber, green kind of view.
Risk management on these large complex programs for me is maintaining RAID. I think participation is really important. I've seen situations where people say, well, it's really difficult compiling a weekly report every week. Well, okay, let's have a template that's no more than a page. I'm sorry, it doesn't take long to do that. And if you maintain a RAID log, which is your risks or your dependencies or etc., it's a lot easier than leaving it too late. If you leave it too late, you get surprises. And then people will ask you why you've not maintained a RAID log. So I would maintain a RAID log.
How can a PMO add value to an organisation?
First of all, by providing visibility. I think the larger an organisation becomes, the more difficult it is. There are people all over the place doing projects or pseudo projects or initiatives. Even if you've got a centralised project team, there's always people doing something. So I think the first thing they can bring to me personally or to anywhere I work is visibility of what's going on, in totality.
Some of the factors that our PMO team have to think about is capacity, resource management, access to the right people from a business services point of view, but then equally access to SMEs and stakeholders on the other side. And we find very often that we might get the plan right for our business services teams, and then we go out to get the SME input and they say, oh, I'm terribly sorry, we've got a completion this week, so we can't do it now. And so I think you've really got to look at who do you need on board with this? And if they are under different constraints, you have to kind of balance that and put it in place.
I think they can then support, obviously, the projects, the programs they're working on. They can highlight risks and issues. They can call out things that perhaps you're so close to the project that you don't even see, and just sort of tap people on the shoulder and say, well, actually, you've been reporting that as green for the last few weeks, but when I read some of your comments, it doesn't feel green, or, So I think they can add that, a really good, to a certain extent, extra layer of governance, but for me, more oversight and visibility and about, the whole, and also how, particularly in larger and complicated organisations, how each of these projects and programs of work fit in together. Not even beyond basic timetabling. No one wants to put 10 changes in the same day to people, spreading them out and that sort of thing. So which you, in your individual team or project or program, you don't have that global view.
The other thing that I think can be really helpful is knowing what those escalation points are. In any business, there are always people who are senior enough to make a decision. And if that means you have to go to the managing partner or the managing director, you sometimes need to do that to get engagement, but you need to know the paths by which you can get there.
Do you have any top tips for addressing changing or indeed competing requirements?
Keeping the vision of the programme and the purpose of the programme in mind, making sure that asking all those questions that say, can we put this on a roadmap? Can we put this on a backlog to be delivered in a future phase? When you've got a backlog, particularly it could be for an ERP system, it could be for a more customer-led kind of product, the definition of what we've got to have in that MVP, what have we got to have at go live, it's just got to be tested. It's easy to sign them off in isolation, but actually it's that cumulative effect of I've got to design it, I've got to build it, I've got to test it, I've got to train it, that ultimately kind of adds the weight. Now, some things will have to meet that bar and be passed. So, hopefully a good program will have built in a degree of contingency to kind of allow for some of that, because we all know that happens. The trick is to kind of make that the exception rather than the norm. So the good old practice of ensuring that steering group are absolutely on board with changes, at least have visibility of them, if not signing off on them explicitly.
How do you determine whether the business is ready?
So from a change management perspective, we would definitely do quite a robust business readiness tracking. And that can be, I suppose, from a few different levels. So I think it's that kind of capability of change in terms of agnostic of what we're delivering, is how a team's feeling, what's the appetite, the change fatigue that might be in the business, what else is going on that could impact them.
And it's definitely looking at the business that is being impacted by the change. There's got to be a business readiness scorecard. Prepare it early, so you use that scorecard very early on to tell you what, as you progress through user acceptance testing, through end-to-end testing, through training, through site rehearsals. And also, you've got to think about the contingency side of it. So if something goes wrong, what's the business continuity plan? In a lot of these programs that we're talking about, you've only got so much time to fix something before there's an impact in the business. There's a big responsibility in the business to be looking at the solution, not from the point of view of just worrying about where it is in testing, but looking at it from how the new system is going to operate. And if there are problems, doing some hypothesis work on where those problems might arise. How long have we got to recover it? Because that's the kind of continuity thinking that needs to go into that business readiness.
I think there's more practical business readiness, which is then about, do the teams understand? Do they have the knowledge and the ability? So we very much use the ADCAR model within Sainsbury's in terms of that kind of level of, building that awareness and desire, and then how do we track through that the teams feel confident in adopting the change when it comes. And I think that's a drumbeat that we would do and start doing kind of months before we go live. I definitely kind of partner with any of the senior leadership team that I'm working with, so they have to be accountable for their team. So how do we share some of those surveys and scores, and what does that tracking look like? How do we get them to green? How do we get them to feel comfortable before we go live? And then lastly, I would say a sort of a go, no go is a sort of robust process that any program would have. But from a change element, I always encourage and ensure that the business actually attend those go, no goes. It has to be a partnership where they're taking accountability that they want to go live with whatever change you're implementing. And therefore, again, it becomes much easier kind of post go live to say, well, you signed up to this, how are you going to help then to make sure that there are going to be challenges, but that we keep going rather than necessarily reverting back.